It's Wednesday evening again here at the Tirconaill Tribune, and we are back to our podcast for this week, August the 12th. It's the 32nd edition of the paper, and there are three of us here. It's a big surprise this evening. Eamonn has returned from his holidays, so has Una and Manus presumably, and Declan Kerr is with us as well. And we're going to look first of all at the editorial, the statutory instrument. That word has been much in favour all the past week, and Catherine Japone is credited for all of this. We're just writing that a statutory instrument for everyone in the audience, and this is our editorial introduction. Just as the country was getting ready for a weekend gig in the rough, marking the first anniversary of Golfgate, along comes another astonishing cock-up to rival any of the biggest series in the Fianna Fáil tent of the Galway races. Remember back in those far-off golden days, even the Curras were rocking in Galway, and they hadn't yet left dry land. That is a good intro to the editorial. You'll want to read that, because if you don't read anything else this week, make sure that's read.
That's a big one.
That is a big one. And it's also been a big week in town here, Declan. You're in sports, looking out the window, the buntings, the flags are flying, marking Brendan Boyce's amazing triumph.
Yes, a very colourful town as we look out here, John, and a magnificent performance by Brendan Boyce last Thursday evening out in Sapporo, finishing 10th in the Olympic race walk in the searing heat, nearly up to 30 degrees at a stage. Brendan done very, very well, and he was in the leading group for a long time, and he pulled back. He come up from 14th to 10th when he crossed the line. So, listen, a great performance, and it's been widely welcomed, around the county and around the country.
Yeah.
His performance landed back on Tuesday into Dublin. I suppose it's probably the last, because the 50k, it's the last staging of the 50k. Brendan has now done 3 Olympics, finished 29th in 2012 in London, 19th in 2016 in Rio, and now 10th.
I think he made it clear in the post Olympic or the post run interviews that he wouldn't, that this was the end of the road.
That's a shame. No?
But he has an amazing career, a glittering career, and let's hope he comes back to see us all in Milford in the coming weeks.
Absolutely.
But anyway, Eamonn, we're going to move on to you.
Yeah, a bit of a blast in the past here. This is one out of the archives now from August 10th, 2001, so 20 years ago. Headline reading: Donegal to lose 60 post offices. That's quite a remarkable thing to be reporting on 20 years ago, given the current situation. But it leads in that as many as 60 Donegal's network of 113 sub-post offices could be closed within a year if plans to contract the service to private businesses goes ahead as planned. That's according to some of the postmasters this week, who concede that they are facing a huge uphill battle to retain these essential services.
I suppose
in
what has
rural
happened
areas.
there is that the transition hasn't happened. The numbers have fallen greater than that, but the transition of transferring it to private business hasn't quite worked out. They've closed over 70 post offices. I suppose at this point the post office network is under threat once again, because it's a big loss maker at 17 million a year. The company itself is a money making business, but the days of the post office and the postman calling around, whilst they're not numbered, there are going to be less postmen.
Yeah.
And they're not less postmen, there's going to be less post offices.
Yeah.
Because we're not using them. I mean, people, I suppose it's the
courier service nearly than a...
Well, it's the internet. I mean, and Post itself is a very big part of the courier service. They have thousands of vans on the road every day. But the days of the traditional post office, like a lot of other things, like the bank branches, they're all gone almost. I mean, come next March, I think is another one of the key red flag areas for the postal service, for postmasters, in that salaries are up for review again, and the fee per item thing relative to what their income is. There's going to be a further decrease. They believe that themselves, and the union believes that.
Yeah.
But looking back to 20 years ago, it was very hard to reconcile back then that we were going to lose 60 post offices, because every town and village had one of them. Donegal probably back in its heyday had several hundred post offices.
Yeah.
and I think the late Eddie Fries, who was in charge of the Letterkenny postal area, which covered from Letterkenny to Burton Port and out to Fanet, I think he was looking after well over 100 post offices just in that part of Donegal alone. But back then you had a lot of mail and you had a lot of postal deliveries, and you had the men still on the bicycles.
They were the hub of the community then.
But we'll move on from that. We'll go back to you, Declan. You've written a story on the front page here in relation to this dispute that's ongoing, seems for a long time, in relation to school secretaries.
Yeah.
What's that about?
John, that's been going on for, I suppose, over 20 years. And it's school secretaries and their fight to be recognised as public sector staff. And they're no further forward now than they were way back in 2002. Kathleen O'Doherty, the spokesperson, telling me that really if nothing happens very shortly, they will be considering their options, and strike could be on the cards in September. They don't have public sector conditions like pension or sick pay, and really they're very angry with the way that the situation has been handled by the government, and it has been dragged out.
I think you've written here that Leo Radcliffe, when it was Taoiseach, expressed the view and the aspiration that they should have that status.
Yes.
Where has that gone wrong?
That seems to have disappeared off the radar now, and Kathleen O'Doherty and her colleagues they seen hope at that stage in October 20 when Radcliffe said that, but really that seems to have disappeared in the bureaucracy and the red tape and everything else, and they're very frustrated at this stage, and they don't expect really that the department's going to come back with any offer, and so they're considering their options at this stage.
Is it a realistic option for them to take industrial action, or are they going to get any support for that, do you think?
Well,
like this has been talked about before over the years.
They did have one. They did have one last year at some stage, and I suppose it's a very difficult one in terms of the public support for it. It's hard to.
This I suppose is
a difficulty.
At least have a good strong union there in Forza.
Yeah.
Which I suppose they didn't always have that.
They do have that behind them, all right. Yeah.
That is that story now. The American Civil War and this Dunfanaghy link.
It's an interesting one here. I've been in touch with a gentleman who actually got in touch initially with the Dunfanaghy website, the Dunfanaghy.com website. He's a gentleman by the name of Mike McClanahan, and he's from North Carolina. And Mike is a retired military soldier in the US Army, but he frequents this Guildford Courthouse National Military Park near where he lives. And one of the places in the corner of the park, lovely parkland area, is a monument that he's uncovered. And what the detail that he's uncovered with it, there's a thing written that it was the name by the fella of it's commemorating the life of 3 men who died in the American Civil War, and one of them was listed as a Private Cornelius Hagney. And he researched who this Cornelius Hagney was, and the nearest record he could find was he was a gentleman who had moved from a place in Ireland called Dunfanaghy, as it was recorded in the records, spelt incorrectly. Now he thinks he's fairly certain that was Dunfanaghy.
Most likely,
and Private Hagney ended up going and settling in Delaware, enlisted in the Continental Army, and his body and the body of his 2 fallen colleagues wasn't found for nearly 100 years after they had died by a retired judge out for a walk, actually.
Do we have any even a basic notion of any links to Dunfanaghy other than Dunfanaghy's name?
Dunfanaghy, but they do.
Hagney would be an unusual name in Dunfanaghy, wouldn't it?
There would be, but there would be Hagneys in that area from sort of Falcarra and that Gorta Hork area, as far as I understand. So there might be somebody out there. This chap, really what he's trying to do, what Mike is trying to do, is to try and find somebody local, or if it was appropriate, he thinks that any fallen American soldier, as is the tradition of the US military, should be presented with a folded American flag. The next of kin should always receive that as a mark of respect and honour. And he's not saying that he would do it, but he thought that maybe if they deemed it suitable, he would try and help to make that happen. So it's a very nice gesture from him. It's a man who's long dead.
If there's anybody out there listening to the podcast from Dunfanaghy, and there may well be, you might,
or further afield,
contact us.
The details are all in the story, and there's some nice pictures that he sent over too. It's a fascinating story, and there's a lot more from that to come. Hopefully we'll hear some more.
We're going from the American Civil War now to a missionary priest, a renowned Father Eddie Deeney from Rathmullen. A checkered, very lengthy story there, Declan. Beautiful pictures. The pictures on that on those pages actually say so much about missionary work.
Yeah, I mean, an absolute gentleman, Father Eddie Deeney. 60 years in the priesthood, most of that, a lot of those years spent in Nigeria and South Africa, serving in communities where there was a lot of poverty. And Father Eddie really has a lovely story to tell there. And of course, he was involved in a few things back at home too. And I suppose the Omagh bombing in 1998, he was on his way home from the missionary house in Drummondtine, heading back to Rathmullen when he came upon the Omagh bombing, and he was there administering the last rites and attending to the sick on that fateful day. And that he tells that story as well. And of course, he was a renowned footballer too with Rathmullen Celtic, a fine goalkeeper. Possibly could have gone on to senior level if he hadn't have gone into the religious life.
What was it about Rathmullen that produced so many priests and also so many talented soccer players?
It's hard to know what was it.
Very strong soccer.
What was in the air down there, but it certainly soccer was a very, 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 very strong. Father Eddie was actually telling me he went to St Eunan's College. He hadn't seen a GA game until he went to St Eunan's College.
Really?
His first year.
In the fabric of Rathmullen then?
Yeah.
Very much in the fabric. Is the fact that it was just a seaside town, and I mean, were they playing soccer? Does that date back to the British times, or what?
I presume it must be something to do with the boats coming in and all that sort of stuff. That was the influence, because, and then the late John Sheridan obviously was a very strong figure there in terms of gathering the players. But they had their own fine players, and the likes of Jim Sheridan.
Get them wee pockets all over.
Father Eddie also wrote a book, My Missionary Journey, which I read at the time.
Yeah.
Which is a very, very, very fine record of his not only of his service but of the work of the missionaries.
Absolutely.
In Africa.
Yeah.
It wasn't an easy task back then. You were a long way away, travel wise, compared to today.
Yeah.
You didn't get home that often.
No, 3 years initially, every 3 years, and then it was 2. But he said, I mean, it was a very difficult and working environment with the heat.
Of course,
very, very
tropic
difficult.
and all these.
Yeah.
But he's a very fit and active man. He was also involved in a rescue in the River Liffey back in the day.
Same year, in 1998, he was coming home through Dublin Airport, got into the car and driving along the Liffey. This lad jumped into the river, and Father Eddie jumped in and rescued him.
Wow. It's quite the stories this man has amassed in his life.
Yeah. We're also going back now to the front page, and I'm giving this to you, Eamonn, here. It's Bishop's apology, not heartfelt, clerical abuse victims. We're just to
that's obviously the story that's been going on there. But that's in an interview on Reading the Gaeltacht that took place on Monday, where the Fannet sisters, Paula and Margaret Martin, they were sexually abused by the former curate Father Con Cunningham between 1971 and 1974, when they were very, very young children. They say that they have been let down by the church, which they say was focused on protecting the institution rather than the victims of child abuse. The sisters took part in the interview by Michelle Negreña for the Bar Scailtaigh programme, and they also appeared on the Claire Byrne show after Cunningham was found guilty of a number of charges.
They've also had huge publicity across the local media, first of all, including Highland Radio. I done a very lengthy piece on Highland Radio with Greg Hughes 2 weeks ago, just after
in the
the
Tribune
trial.
before
but
that.
They've been in all the national media as well, and I suppose after all these years, they feel that a weight has been lifted off their shoulders.
Yeah. But the thing they say is that they still feel that the Bishop's apology is not heartfelt. They don't. That's a very genuine concern that they would have.
One of the telling things coming out of that commentary on it afterwards is the fact that so many people expressed the same point of view.
Yeah.
So the church is seen. I mean, what else can they do in the current circumstances? Like as Paula Martin says there, the template for all these apologies are exactly the same.
It just rings hollow.
There's more expected by abuse victims and indeed by the congregations who are part of that church. But we're going to move on from that. We're going to a lead story. We still have a lead story in the Tribune this week, and it's about the dairy industry as Ireland's sacred cow. Henry O'Donnell, who's an executive member of the INHFA, he lives up in Inishowen. He says his organisation is totally opposed to measures to cap suckler cow numbers. They intend to fight the issue tooth and nail. And as angry farmers line up to oppose the proposals, Henry says that it is a real mystery to me why the dairy industry continues to be Ireland's sacred cow. This is part of the new cap and the environmental issues that have to be confronted. The Commission in Brussels obviously sees that Ireland is not doing anywhere near enough in any of these proposals. I suppose this came as a bit of a shock last Thursday night when it came out. It came out very much under the radar, wasn't readily picked up. The Farmers' Journal had already been delivered and read that day.
Yeah.
But this was a proposal to cap the suckler cow numbers. Now the suckler numbers are much less in number than the dairy sector. It's not an issue of suckler farmer versus dairy farmers. It is about the industry.
Yeah.
The dairy industry has continued to expand and develop, and the likes of Henry O'Donnell and people like that in the suckler business would argue that at all times the suckler herd has a very, very light carbon footprint, whereas the dairy herd is fed on very rich protein that is taken in from
Bigger footprint.
many countries all around the world, and the cost alone of that transport is adding immensely to the footprint. But there's a real issue going on here about the global warming, and in Ireland there's a big focus on farming. That carbon emissions are accounting, methane gases are accounting for a third of the output, and there's a big battle to be fought there. It's a very tricky one for Minister Charlie McConalogue, because he's going to try and please everybody and at the same time please nobody. And it's a very daunting task that he faces, because he has until now to Christmas to get the Irish proposals accepted by the Commission, or else we could be in real difficulty with the new cap. The Commission is obviously pushing Ireland for much more active participation and delivery than is included in any of the preambles that have come out before.
I suppose this recent, or the global climate report of this week, I suppose doesn't
pull into focus too, but
it makes it very, very tricky for the Minister for Agriculture in terms of...
It makes it very tricky for the government as well, because, like, on the one hand they're going to have to be seen to be acting, yet we all live in the one footprint on this globe, that we're curbing the use of peat and peat moss and all these kind of things, and coal, yet we're going to be importing peat moss from halfway around the world in the next couple of years. So like we're only adding to the footprint. It can't be tackled as a nationwide or a countrywide issue. It has to be tackled
globally.
There's 210 countries in the world. But they'll be still here next week when we'll be back with another podcast. Until then, thanks for listening.